Your role is over. Get out of here." The moment I heard those words, my mind went blank. When I came home from work, what greeted me was an empty room. There wasn't even a trace of the days I had spent building my life there. "I'm going to live with Howell, so we need a bigger room. We're going to use your room as our bedroom." That day, just like always, I came home late after working overtime. I barely managed to drive back to the house. I thought I could finally relax, but I froze when I walked in. My room's door was half open. When I went inside, the closet, bookshelf, and bed, everything was gone. It was like any sign that I had existed there had been completely erased. My mother, watching TV in the living room, glanced at me and gave a faint smile. "I moved all your stuff out." I stood there and looked at my mother. "What do you mean?" My voice was so faint, nearly vanished, but she seemed to hear it perfectly. "I'm going to live with Howell, so we need a bigger room. We're going to use your room as our bedroom." She said it too natural, as if I had never really belonged there in the first place. I asked again, "You decided all this without asking to me at all?" "Without even looking away from the TV," she replied calmly. "Well, you don't need it anymore, right? Your role is over. Get out of here." At that moment, I felt like something cold and heavy was dropped deeply into my heart. It was the day after I had finished paying for Crystal's university tuition. How much had I sacrificed and worked myself to the bone until now? "I see." That was all I said. Without even asking where my things were, I walked toward the front door. Only my father's memorial photo remained in the hallway, and I glanced at it once. When I opened the door, the damp air and silence of the night wrapped around me. I just had to get out of that house. With that single thought, I took my first step, and my phone vibrated. The screen said Crystal. The timing was too perfect, and I hesitated for a moment. When I answered, her cheerful voice rang out, "Big sis, you won't believe what just happened." I took a deep breath and replied in a calm voice, "What is it?" "I got selected as an outstanding student, and I'm going to get a scholarship." "Isn't that amazing?" I almost cried. It was truly wonderful news. I was proud of her from the bottom of my heart. It felt like all the time and support I had given her hadn't been wasted. But more than that, there was something bitterly ironic about hearing it right now. "That's great." "Really?" I tried to sound natural, but my voice trembled a little. "Big sis? Did something happen?" "Yeah, actually, I just left the house. I don't think I'm going back." "What?" There was silence on the other end of the line. I briefly explained the situation. The fact that my room had been given away without my consent. The fact that my mother said, "Your role is over." And the fact that I was now standing there with nowhere to go. Crystal was silent for a while. After a long pause, she finally spoke in a strained voice. "That's awful. I can't believe it. But it's okay now. I don't want to stay in that house anymore, not if it means wearing myself down. Congratulations on the scholarship. You really worked hard. Sis, I want to live with you. From now on, it's my turn to help. I don't want you to be alone." Her words nearly brought me to tears. I had always thought of her as a child who didn't understand anything, that it was only natural for her to be spoiled, and that I had to be the one to support her. But without realizing it, she had started to grow up too. I haven't contacted them yet, but I'm thinking of going to Dad's parents' place, Grandpa and Grandma's house. Wait, I barely even know them. Me too. The last time I saw them was at Dad's funeral. We haven't kept in touch at all, so I don't know what things are like now. But I think Grandpa and Grandma would take me in. At the very least, they're not like Mom. I'll go too. I want to go." Crystal's voice was full of determination. It might have been the first time I'd ever heard her speak like that. I looked up at the sky. "Then I'll come get you tomorrow. Start packing your things." "Okay, I will." Those words made my chest tighten. After hanging up the phone, I took a deep breath. The air I exhaled melted into the quiet of the night. I began to walk. Not to fulfill someone else's role, but to reclaim my own life. That night, I stayed at a nearby budget hotel. I couldn't think about anything. I just collapsed onto the bed. Luckily, I had the next day off from work. Since I couldn't sleep right away, I started to think about the past. My father passed away when I was 24. It was a heart attack. So sudden and so abrupt that I couldn't process any of it. Still, time went on and life began with just my mother, Crystal, and me. I worked as a financial analyst. My days were filled with numbers and market pressure, not easy, but the income was stable. My mother worked part-time, but her earnings were minimal and couldn't support our living expenses. She always said, "You're the only one I can rely on." Every time she said that, something inside me told me, I have to support them. If I didn't, I couldn't be a proper replacement for Dad. That's how I naturally came to shoulder the household finances, stabilize my mother's emotional state, and support Crystal through high school so she could focus on her future. Crystal is 7 years younger than me. Ever since she was little, I had been the one holding her hand. When our parents fought and she cried, I'd carry her to the nearby park and push her on the swing to calm her down. Back then, she always clung to my sleeve, calling sis, sis, and she was so adorable that taking care of her came naturally to me. At mealtimes, I taught her how to use a spoon. After baths, I dried her hair. At night, I read picture books to her and fell asleep beside her. Even when the air in the house felt tense, just seeing Crystal's smile was enough to save me. The first time I saw her with a school backpack on, my heart clenched like I was watching my own child grow up. More than a sister, I felt like a little mother, determined to protect her. Crystal was cheerful and friendly, and people naturally liked her. Mother adored her and spoiled her endlessly. Even after she entered high school, Mother kept saying, "Crystal's still young. I'll let her enjoy herself," and gave her almost everything she wanted. A smartphone, trips, concert tickets. Most of those were paid for from my income. Meanwhile, I never went on trips, owned no brand name items, and spent nearly everything for the family. Every payday, I covered Crystal's tuition and living expenses, Mother's costs, and even the house payments, and I never complained. I paid for Crystal's college expenses over 2 years, spending more than $30,000 in total. Rather than showing gratitude, Mother acted like it was simply expected. Even when I got home late at night, she was laughing in front of the TV. At home, I wasn't seen as a daughter, I was treated like a manager, someone responsible for keeping the emotions and finances in check. That's how I became connected to the family, not by love, but by duty. But I had reached my limit. Still, I didn't want Crystal to feel the loss of our father too deeply. So I had resolved to hang on at least until she graduated. Around that time, Mother started bringing a man named Howell into the house. At first, she said they were just having dinner together, but over time his visits became more frequent. Before I knew it, he was lounging around like it was his home, and he and Mother were quietly preparing to live together without my knowledge. I never liked Howell very much. He had a way of speaking that felt condescending, like he looked down on others. It always seemed like he was trying to draw us into Mother's world, and I just couldn't stand it. But Mother was completely smitten with him. Whenever he came up in conversation, her expression softened, and she'd barely listen to what I was saying. That change only made me feel more isolated. And in the end, getting kicked out of the house happened far more suddenly and easily than I had expected. While I was thinking about all of that, I must have fallen asleep. The next day, I went with Crystal to our grandparents' house. Standing at the front door, my chest tightened. It had been years since I last visited. The last time I was there, my father was still alive. It was the summer after I graduated from university we had visited together. I remembered him being genuinely happy to see his parents again, while I sat beside him, feeling a bit shy. And the next time I saw my grandparents were the day of my father's funeral. When I rang the doorbell, I heard footsteps almost immediately. The door opened, and my grandfather appeared. "Aurora?" His eyes widened, then softened into a gentle smile. "Hi, Grandpa. It's been a while. Crystal's with you too? What's going on?" Come in, it's cold out there." Grandma quickly came running from the living room and embraced us. Her warm arms made me want to cry. "It's been so long. I'm so glad you both came." We were led to the living room and served hot tea. The familiar scent of old furniture and carpet gently wrapped around us. On the wall hung an old family photo of my father in his younger days. It felt nostalgic, yet somehow distant. Our grandparents were truly happy to see us. Even before we explained everything, their eyes seemed to already understand. "You must have been through a lot. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But this is your home. No need to hold back." With those words, something that had been tightly wound inside me finally unraveled. "Thank you, truly thank you." Crystal also bowed her head repeatedly, her eyes full of tears. The days that followed felt almost too peaceful, like the life we'd known before had been a lie. Grandma prepared a warm breakfast every morning, and Grandpa tended to the garden, saying, "Spending time like this really calms the heart." Crystal went to university during the day, helped with housework in the evenings, and started a part-time job at a nearby cafe on weekends. Her change was visible. The sister who had been spoiled by our mother and had taken my support for granted was now stepping up to carry part of the burden herself. I was quietly surprised and a little proud. One evening, after dinner, we were chatting over tea with our grandparents when Grandma suddenly brought something up. "By the way, it's about your father's inheritance. We received an official notice, too. But your mother told us that you two had given up your share. So we were completely convinced." "Given up our share?" I raised my voice without meaning to. Crystal also set down her teacup. "We were never told anything about that. We didn't even know there was an inheritance, let alone agree to give it up." "I see, I thought so." Grandpa let out a small sigh. "It seemed odd. You both loved your father so much. I couldn't believe you wouldn't want anything from him. But we believed your mother." I immediately asked my grandparents if they still had the paperwork from that time. They pulled out a bundle of old documents from the storage room. Inside, we found a copy labeled Inheritance Waiver Agreement. It had both my name and Crystal's, alongside unfamiliar signatures. This is completely forged. We've never seen this document before." I forced the words out. Grandpa and Grandma fell silent. No one said anything for a while. Unforgivable. It was Crystal's voice, usually soft and kind, now firm with anger. "She pushed everything onto you, did whatever she wanted, and now even took Dad's inheritance. That's not family." I bit my lip. Deep down, maybe a part of me had still wanted to believe in her. But this was the final blow. She had taken advantage of our father's death. "I will take legal action." When I said the words, my voice sounded oddly calm and clear. "She illegally took Dad's inheritance. She forged our signatures. I will bring everything to light." Our grandparents looked surprised, but they nodded firmly. "If that's what Aurora wants, we'll help however we can." Crystal held my hand and said, "I'll fight with you." That night, I lay in bed in the quiet room, unable to sleep. If I listened carefully, I could hear the ticking of a clock in the distance, quietly marking the passage of time. Staring blankly at the ceiling, I reflected on my life up to now. Looking back, I had always been suppressing something, always silencing my own desires for someone else's sake. I tried to believe that swallowing my emotions and giving up what I wanted was the right thing to do, that it made me strong. But maybe I was wrong. Now, I finally realized something. It's okay to choose to stand up for myself. And making that choice isn't selfish at all. Coming to this house was truly the right decision. There are people here who support us no matter what, who give us warmth that words can't describe. And that's why I decided to act. The next morning, I woke up and immediately got moving. My first stop was a law office. I sat down in front of the female lawyer I had made an appointment with, took a deep breath, and began explaining everything. My father passed away 5 years ago. Soon after, my mother claimed that we had given up our rights to the inheritance. But neither my sister nor I ever expressed such intent. The signatures were forged. The lawyer nodded as she took notes. Then she looked up at me and asked calmly, "Do you have a copy of the documents?" I pulled the waiver copy we had found at my grandparents' house from my bag. As soon as she looked at it, her expression stiffened. The date format, the handwriting, they're all suspicious. If we send this for handwriting analysis, there's a high chance it will be ruled a forgery. I nodded silently. What you're describing could lead to both civil and criminal actions. First, we file a civil lawsuit to recover the unjustly gained assets and demand a reassessment of the inheritance. In addition, since the signatures were likely forged, we can also consider a criminal complaint for document falsification and alteration of private documents. As I listened, I noticed how calm I had become. The anger and sadness had already passed. The only thing pushing me forward now was the conviction that I couldn't let this go unanswered. Please, I want everything to come to light. To proceed, I gathered the necessary documents, a family register from that time and a copy of my father's death certificate. My grandparents also helped by checking whether there was a will. There was no official will, but they found some letters and notes my father had written while he was alive. One of them included a message: "I want my daughters to live their own lives with peace of mind." That night, I spread out the collected evidence on the living room table at my grandparents' house. Crystal sat beside me, silently looking over everything. "I never knew. I didn't realize you were carrying so much on your shoulders. I chose to do it myself. But now I want to bring it to the end. I don't want Dad's memory or our lives to be twisted by someone else anymore." Crystal's profile that night looked nothing like the little sister I used to know. She had changed from someone who needed protection into someone who wanted to take responsibility. A few days later, the lawyer contacted me to confirm the lawsuit had been filed. The complaint had been officially delivered to our mother, and the civil suit had begun. Surprisingly, we heard nothing from her. No angry calls. No crying. No apology. Just complete silence. I accepted it calmly. Now I understood clearly she had never seen us as family, only as something to control. At the time, I had taken a temporary leave from work. Honestly, I wasn't in the right mental state to focus, and this legal battle felt like a kind of reboot for my life. As I continued preparing for the lawsuit, I began to slowly reclaim myself, day by day. The scent of the morning coffee Grandpa brewed, the time spent picking tomatoes with Grandma in the garden, the countless failed dinners Crystal tried to cook. All of it felt completely different from the life I had known, one driven by obligation to survive. One night, after Grandpa and Grandma had gone to bed, I sat alone in the quiet living room and found myself gazing at a photo of my father. "Dad, was this the right thing to do?" The words I whispered dissolved gently into the room. In my head, I knew suing my mother was the right thing to do. But deep inside, there was still hesitation smoldering quietly. Was it really okay to take your own family to court? I stared at my father's kind eyes in the photo, silently asking him for an answer. "What would you have done, Dad?" Caught between what's right and what I still questioned, I simply sat there, leaning on the memory of him. Soon, the truth would be laid bare in a courtroom. But it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about cutting ties with the past or hurting anyone. It was simply about taking back my own life. And finally, I had made it to the starting line. On the day of the trial, I took a deep breath and stepped into the courtroom. The air was cold, filled with tension, and though it was my first time in such a space, my legs didn't tremble. Beside me was my lawyer. Behind us sat my grandparents and Crystal. Knowing someone was watching over me gave me a quiet strength deep inside. A few minutes later, my mother entered the courtroom. She wore a flashy suit, but her complexion looked pale. The moment our eyes met, she quickly looked away. The proceedings moved forward steadily. The lawyer presented the forged inheritance waiver agreement we had never seen and its handwriting analysis. Then came the fact that my mother had accepted all of my father's assets alone and couldn't explain what she'd done with them. She had mishandled shared family property. The lawyer laid out these facts plainly, but with sharp precision. My mother's representative tried to defend her by saying, due to confusion within the family, the waiver had to be processed quickly, but there was no strength in his words. "Were your daughters aware of this procedure?" the judge asked. I answered clearly, "No, we weren't. Neither my sister nor I have ever seen that document. The signatures were forged. How do you feel, standing here today, regarding the inheritance?" the judge asked. I chose my words carefully, then spoke calmly. My father worked his whole life to make sure we could live with peace of mind. I don't want that intention twisted for someone else's convenience. That's all. At that moment, my mother suddenly stood up. I was doing my best too. After he died, what was I supposed to do all alone? Her voice echoed through the courtroom. But no one reacted. The judge gently asked her to sit, and she did. I closed my eyes and slowly exhaled. As a witness, Crystal took the stand. I've seen how much my sister sacrificed for our family, and I took that for granted. But I never once heard about that waiver document. Despite trembling, Crystal looked straight ahead and spoke. Toward the end of the hearing, the verdict was announced. In this case, the defendant's actions are recognized as involving unjust enrichment and document forgery. The court orders compensation for the plaintiffs and the return of the inherited property. At that moment, I felt something like the tension in my back dissolve. My mother covered her face and sat motionless, looking down. There was no one left by her side. I didn't feel like I had won. That thought never came to me. There was only a quiet sense that it was finally over. I turned to my grandparents and Crystal and gave a small nod. After the trial ended, I chose independence and began living alone. With the warmth of my grandparents' support behind me, I decided to walk on my own 2 feet. I no longer had to support my mother financially, and I was finally able to use my time and money for myself. Life was still full of things I wasn't used to, and some nights felt a little lonely. But even so, small things filled my heart, drinking tea from a cup I liked, placing a little plant in the room. I didn't have to be considerate of anyone. No one could place their burdens on me. This space was no one's but mine. It was my place. At last, I had begun to reclaim my life. And Crystal, too, was walking her own path, balancing college and part-time work. The sister who once leaned on our mother was no longer there. In her place was someone who asked about our grandparents' health at breakfast and listened when I talked about work. I returned to the office. After several months on leave, I was deeply moved when my boss and coworkers welcomed me back, just as they always had. This time, I wasn't working just to exhaust myself. Now, I was living for myself. And I was finally starting to believe that. But that didn't mean my heart was completely healed. Even after we cut ties, I heard my mother was still telling relatives things like, "My daughters betrayed me," or "they abandoned their family." To her, I had always been the daughter who was supposed to support her. The moment I stopped fulfilling that role, I became a traitor. Even so, I drew a boundary for the sake of reclaiming my life. Putting distance between myself and my mother was not a sin. If I had kept carrying everything, I would have broken. Still, Sometimes I wonder, did I truly make the right choice? In the quiet of the night, guilt sometimes creeps in, asking whether I abandoned my family. There's still a version of me that once loved her, and those memories haven't completely disappeared. Family isn't just about blood. If staying together only causes pain, then walking away is also a form of protection. Those were the words my grandmother said to me, and they gave me a sense of peace. One day, a relative called. "I ran into your mother at the supermarket the other day. She looked really thin. Seems like living alone is hard on her." Apparently Howell had left her, and she had quit her job too. With no one to support her, she now lived in an old apartment, chased by debt. I felt no pity, no anger. Maybe my mother was someone who could only feel self-worth by controlling others. Maybe the reason she made me shoulder the responsibility of family was because she was terrified of standing on her own. But I would never return to that world. If I tried to save her, I'd only be used again. That was the one thing I had promised myself never to repeat. That weekend, we all gathered at my grandparents' house for dinner. During the meal, Crystal spoke up. "Hey sis, I think, after I graduate from university, I want to become a psychologist. I want to be someone who can stay close to people's hearts." I smiled. "I think that's a great idea. You'd be good at it." Crystal let out a shy little laugh, then quietly added, "I think the only reason I'm who I am now is because you were there for me." Her words filled something deep inside my heart with warmth. My decision hadn't been wrong. By cutting ties with the past, I had made room for this calm, gentle life. Here, we had something we could never have found in a life of control and sacrifice, an equal and tender bond. I picked up the framed photo of my father and spoke softly. "Dad, I finally found a place I can truly call family. Thank you. I know you were watching over us all along. This is the future I chose. A life that belongs to me alone without being exploited or sacrificed by anyone. At last, this is where it begins.